And she said, and I'll never forget this, and I asked, because I was miserable, probably going through what they call today athletic depression and other types. It's just a terrible time for me. And she said, you need to get right with God. And I was like, what does that mean? I honestly had no clue. I mean, my father was not a believer. He renounced his faith. There was no discussion. And I honestly had no idea what that meant.
This episode of the Power of War podcast is brought to you by SaferNet. For a full VPN experience coupled with antivirus, web filters, internet controls, and an internet use tracking console, SaferNet provides complete protection for your organization. Check them out online at safernet.com. You've tuned into the Power of War podcast with Brad Hawkins, serial entrepreneur and author of at least 3 books right now: God, the Devil, and the Internet, Unshakable Life, and The Power of War, which will release in print on the 14th of April, 2026. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, also a serial entrepreneur and an author of 3 books. I work for him, I retire for him, and she works for him. Our goal with every Power of War podcast is to provide a lively, unfiltered, unedited, unfettered, and unscripted conversation with a business person. We'll explore their daily work, their story, and see if we can uncover a Power of War moment facing our guests. Our goal is to access the wisdom of God for the solutions that man seeks. This podcast is sponsored by SaferNet.com. Greg Books is an entrepreneur, a builder, a follower of Christ whose life took a dramatic turn after extraordinary success and equally extraordinary loss. Greg built a thriving resort business, only to see a collapse and a business failure that unraveled nearly every area of his life. In the middle of that collapse, he walked through divorce and the loss of his father. What followed was not a quick comeback story. It was a season of deep destruction, grief, surrender, and rebuilding from the inside out. Greg is a newer believer, but his faith is not casual. He loves God with everything he has. He's committed to abiding, listening, and following God's plan, even when the path forward feels a little unclear. Greg has also led Bible studies and walked alongside others in their faith journeys, not as someone with all the answers, but as someone who has learned how to sit with God in the waiting room. Today's conversation is about loss, obedience, courage, and what it really looks like to rebuild a life on God's foundation. Greg, welcome to the Power of War podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're sure looking forward to this conversation, Greg. I know that we've known each other for quite a while, and we have the privilege of spending time in a Bible study every Wednesday, and that is a joy that we all get to have. And you've been leading this last portion of our Bible study, which has really been a fun journey. So I'm looking forward to this and just hearing and seeing what God has to say. So in this Power of Or conversation, just as an explanation, the Power of Or is all about curiosity in our life. We end up in this interesting spot where we believe we have everything figured out, but yet God is much bigger than most of our conversations. He is always working 2 sides of the deal. He's working with us and he's working with others. And if we maintain curiosity in what we believe is true, we can always end up in a spot where we can see God working in other areas. And so that's what the Power of War is all about, is that when we get to the place of saying, this is what we know, whatever that is, I am, my business failure has destroyed me, or God is bringing in a whole new version of who I'm going to be. And so that's our goal, is to find what God's doing in these situations. So I'm going to start out with what we would call a rapid fire. So what I'd love for you to do is I'm going to give you a word, and you just give me the first thought that comes to mind, just right off the top of your head. Whatever that is, it doesn't matter what's right or wrong. What is the first thing that comes out? So the first word is success.
Peace.
Loss.
Grief.
Control.
Surrender.
Waiting.
Abiding.
Faith.
Love.
Future.
In God's hands.
Obedience.
Seeking.
Hope.
Trust.
Father.
It's good.
And future.
Hope.
That is awesome. I love that because it just makes it so that there's no pretenses. You just throw out what it is that is currently in your world right now. And that's something that I do for myself often is what did I just think about? It crosses my mind if I'm spending time with the Lord and I read a verse and I think, wow, that was really meaningful. And then I start writing down what was meaningful about it, because that's what I want to capture. Well, Greg, we've known each other for quite a while, walked with you in watching you build this amazing resort business that we had. And we've actually spent many a night at your resort and enjoying the fruits of that place. It was just absolutely incredible. What originally got you to start the resort that you built?
Good question. It was, in that business, I was a kind of experience led and providing experiences and a reset for people to, outside of their busy lives, to be able to have a place to go and reset. And, I would say, before I was familiar with what finding the Lord meant, and to find a space to reboot and do that.
So you started building this resort before you really understood who Christ was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was through that process like that I became a believer after starting that process. Yep.
So tell us about that journey. What in the process of building it, did you have any idea that God was involved in this process, or
no?
What happened? How did you end up in a place where you started recognizing that there was a God of the universe that loved you and believed in you and was you were his child?
So it's a good question. Nope. And it's interesting that you guys invited me to this interview, and I had never been. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. So this is my first time to consider it. But I would say, God walked that out in stages for me. When I was in the process of building that resort, I still remember distinctly that I walked up into our lodge, which was having a second floor built, and it just hit me that, I had run small businesses before, but this was destined to be a medium-sized business, and I didn't know how to do that. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, I have to find somebody that can help me, that's done something like this before. They can help coach or guide me through it. And some sort of, business person to help me operate on that next level. And I used to have commute time back and forth. It was about half an hour back to my house. And that would be my time to talk to my family. So I called my mom. And I told her that. I said, hey, this just hit me. I can't believe it. And she literally, the next thing out of her mouth, she's like, I might know the guy and he's there in Denver. And I'm like, what? That's impossible. And so, that long story short, I called the guy and he became my kind of business mentor, and he ran a CEO coaching group. And he's the one that kind of introduced me, did introduce me to the Lord, and also helped me to see through that process how the Lord was working in the business. And shortly after he passed, and I'm not sure if you guys know this, is when I got invited to join our Bible study. Again, having not yet ever owned or really opened a Bible with any intent to understand what's inside, having grown up in a very different circumstance.
So your business mentor introduced you to God in that process. Tell us tell us what it is that happened in your spirit, happened in your soul in that journey of understanding. Was it immediate? Or did it take some time to really get to the place where you understood who God was? And I find this interesting because a lot of people that we talk to have been a believer for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it is, we oftentimes don't remember the details and the feelings and the emotions behind that journey, especially becoming a believer as an adult.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why you've asked me here. I remember those things. So I remember, so this mentor had also asked me, this building this adventure resort wasn't really enough to do. He had invited me to be part of another project that he was building, and to be his number two for that project. And we would talk about that, in the very early hours, because I started early for the building and then running of that place. We would talk about this project on a daily basis, and what would happen is we talk about like the org chart or how this was going to be built out. And one day he wouldn't have the answer. We'd talk, in the afternoon, maybe on my drive home or whatever, and he wouldn't have a clarity on it. And the next morning we'd talk, literally just enough time to sleep in between, and he'd have all the answers. And I was like, "What happened? You didn't know any of this yesterday." He said, "Oh, God gave that to me in the shower," and he kept going on, and then he'd just keep going. And I'm like, "Wait, time out. Wait a minute here. What do you mean God gave that to you in the shower?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, God just gave me that plan and the shower, and so that this is what we're going to do. This is how it'll work." And it was perfect plan. And but Brad, we had no idea the day before. And when we talked about it, we bounced it back and forth, and so the first time it really took me off guard, but I kind of probably dismissed it mentally. Again, not having been brought up in an environment where faith was not part of our upbringing. And but when it kept happening the second and third times, it becomes harder to dismiss. You're like, wait, there's something here. And it's like, and so I'd drill in, I'd start to ask more questions, and really into your concept of or, I was curious. I was very curious. I had never, having not had the door opened for me earlier in life, I was open to to walking through that door. I didn't have any guidance, any understanding of it. And that was my walkthrough of that. And then to answer what might be your next question is, what was the next kind of level of that? And I became aware shortly after joining the group while the park was fully operational, the resort, that how God was working with our finances, basically, in terms of the employees and that sort of thing. It just really became clear to me, and then the third step for me was when we had our first series, I guess, in our Bible study, was Experiencing God by Blackaby. That study that we went through, I had a pretty strong personal experience with God, and that was kind of the succession for me, if you will.
What I love about the fact that your mentor showed you the relevancy of God without just pounding the gospel over your head. He just talked about, he had this intimacy with God. God was giving him answers. The relationship was relevant. It was real. It was applicable to daily life. That's fabulous, because a lot of people listening are like, really, I'm not sure that I really believe this whole God thing. But when you hang around somebody who's walking with God, God invades every part of your life. He is my relevancy in everything that I do, and I go to him for answers in every part of my life. And I love that your mentor introduced you to Christ that way, instead of just pounding you over there with the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is really interesting. I'm glad you pulled that out. So that is, there's got to be a reason, right? Not just a guilt or a fear, but living with God is an abundant life. It is a wonderful life. It is a fulfilling life. Even if we don't even understand where he's abundant in our life, he's very abundant. So That is very, very interesting. So, Greg, most people look at failure as kind of a theory or a fear that they're operating in. You lived that failure, um, at least in some terms. That is the case. What is it? When is it that you saw that this thing was coming apart? You are, we've had many conversations, and I would call you a highly intelligent and sophisticated businessman. You brought some concepts to me that are just phenomenal and fantastic. But yet still, this resort came apart. And what I'd love to do is hear how you practically saw that happening, and then how that affected your faith.
Hmm. Well, it might be different than you think, because to me those things were combined. Like I just walked out. My business mentor came involved early on, but we had already had challenges out of the gate, and listening to your story on the first of these podcasts, and also Brad, just knowing some of your story, the the challenges that I went through started immediately. I mean, I had early things went sideways right out of the gate with the park, our financing, the banks that we worked with. I had an early betrayal, so I started off upside down in the first month, and all in. So I had basically done my part, put every penny in, and then had some other people that did not, and I was kind of forced to either succeed without any help or suffer the consequences. So I started off, very upside down, and you just deal with those things when you're in them, and and you just walk it out. There's really no other choice. But to your point, what what that experience was like was losing all those things. I was married at the time. I was happily married. I had my father had a pretty severe stroke. He still lived in a different state. We moved him out shortly after, and he spent the rest of his days out in Colorado and with under our care. And I, through that process, I lost all those things. I lost my marriage first, the park quickly second. My father was quick. It was a quick third. It was so fast and furious to the point that it's even hard to remember. Like, I had to go back after it, like plot out some of the dates. There was just so much going on. But through that process, and I think the interesting part, and in my story, is that there was never a time where it was acutely devastating or painful, because the Lord walked into my life, or I shouldn't say it that way. He made me aware that he was operating in my life pretty early on, after I'd already had all the pressure, I guess, of having things go upside down in the first month, and meeting this mentor, to knowing he was with me throughout all these challenges. You got to remember, 2 out of the 3 challenges were there right from the beginning. My dad had already had this severe stroke, and I became overnight responsible for all of his care, and I was upside down with business. So I was kind of battling out of that from a position of great challenge already. So really, it was nothing. And my experience of that was nothing but a benefit to get to become aware that the Lord was working in my life, and then with and for me. And then I was blessed with all the guys that the 3 of us jointly know in our circles, as being part of that journey with me.
So, Greg, you have you are a brand new believer. You have this business that is, really a substantial business. I mean, it's a beautiful operation. It has all the bells and whistles to become an incredible resort that people would come just for the purpose of restoration and I mean, we did some amazing things, rock climbing and four-wheelers and all kinds of fun stuff at this resort. And you look at that and say, okay, now you've turned your life over to Christ, and you would think, oh my goodness, this is an incredible world. I've got this resort. I now have this understanding of the God of the universe that's sovereign, that has the power over everything. And then everything starts crumbling. You lose your resort. You lose your wife that you love and adore. You lose your dad. That, I mean, you all of your attention goes to taking care of him. There's a lot of people would say, who is God in that? Why didn't God take care of you? Why didn't God protect you and restore the things that have fallen apart? Why are you in this spot? What would you say to that?
I had an employee there at the resort, Brad, that said something to me. We went on a drive. I think we picked up an extra bus. We had a lot of vehicles with that thing, and we got some good time together and in the car on the drive out there. And, I asked him a similar question. He had some challenges in his life. He was a Marine. And I've learned from my Marine friends that you're once a Marine, always a Marine, but he had some injuries that allowed him not to, that forced him out. And he did not like that. He was not happy about that. He was, and now I understand, he was angry with God, but, he did some other pretty interesting things, including working with us. And, I asked him, how he dealt with that. And he's like, well, God had other plans for me. And that was, again, in those same times. That was before things had gotten, rougher, I guess, as they progressed for me. And that really struck me when he said that. I was unpacking some of our Bible study things with him on that drive down, and we had a great conversation. And it just that concept that he said, I would say the same thing was true for me, is that God had other plans. Then, I had started this, maybe somewhat of my idea, and, maybe God planted the seed, but that wasn't the end result. That wasn't the end objective. That wasn't the outcome that he was steering me towards. And so, I guess through the relationships I built, through my relationship with the Lord, as we walk through that, I came to understand that that was just, he's taking me towards a different outcome. My business mentor and I had kind of walked through some 5 and 10 year plans and how I would exit. And, the Lord had a different exit in mind. And, I don't see it as better or worse than what we had talked about. In fact, I wasn't attached or honestly, I wasn't very excited about some of the other outcomes on how I might, sell or transition out. I wasn't attached, I would say, to those. And so, while a lot of those losses, as we all know, are painful to walk through, the belief and the faith and the understanding as it's building that God has something else in mind, and that's necessarily better, is a big part of my story.
So let me ask you a question, because a lot of times in people's lives, Greg, there's a time where you can look back, because you were close to 50 when you became a believer, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So a lot of times God reaches out to us during our lives. We don't necessarily recognize it. But now that you know God, you may look back at that. But the reason I bring this up is that sometimes God reaches out to us and says, hey, Greg, I'm here. I'm knocking. I'm looking for you. And you're like, yeah, I'm good. And then you move on. And sometimes God allows pretty significant circumstances in our lives to get our attention and go, Greg, you're my son. I want you to know me. So I'm going to let some tougher stuff go on in your life so you can realize the fleetingness of it. Was there a time previous in your life, now that you know what to look at, where God had reached out to you and you just kind of said, yeah, no thanks?
Good question, Jim. So there was a one time that I really look back on that I can remember. So when I was my first career attempt was in sports medicine, and I was a competitive athlete, and was on my way to becoming a sports medicine doc. I was finishing a grad degree, and which, with combined with that, got a first year of medical school, and that was my first direction. I was all in with that, and that back injury stopped that stopped both my athletic career and my professional career at the same time. And my girlfriend at the time, grad school, we're still friends today. She has a great family in a different state, but we still keep up. And she said, and I'll never forget this, and because I was miserable, probably going through what they call today athletic depression and other types. It's just a terrible time for me. And she said, you need to get right with God. And I was like, what does that mean? I honestly had no clue. I mean, my father was not a believer. He renounced his faith. There was no discussion. And I honestly had no idea what that meant. And I called her so excited during this process of, like, after I had met that mentor, and just like talking her ear off about what God was doing in life. Hey, guess what? And now, we talk maybe once a month, and I just kind of share with her. It's like, in the last year, I've said, I finally know what you meant back then. So that was one of those, milestones, Jim. It's not that, but there was no like disobedience or shame in that for me. I was just clueless, like, blissfully ignorant without the bliss,
That's that is awesome.
I love that you're being so transparent, and your life, honestly, your life sucked for several years. I mean, and you're still in that spot where you're going, okay, God, you have let me go through all this stuff, but you had some really deep pain. Going through a divorce everybody listening has gone through a divorce knows that it's a death that just keeps on giving. It's rough. Losing a business where you've poured all your heart, mind, soul, and bank account into is also devastating. I had the same experience. So, and then you losing your dad, and really you lost him in the stroke, and then you lost him eventually all the way. Was there a time where you thought, I just don't think God understands really how I work here? Or did that stuff actually draw you close to God?
Great question. From my experience, again, different than some, mine was just a kind of progressive revelation. I came to understand and then be challenged progressively. As he walked things out with me through that resort experience, and then my divorce and losing my father through all that, and closing that resort. Each step, there was, I would say, with me, a new level of challenge, and that those challenges were to kind of Brad's concept in Power of War. One of the biggest earliest ones that I could put my finger on, in one of the studies that we went through was, I think it was John Eldridge, and it was interpretation of events. And I just got so convicted about how I had seen everything, and how my dad had he had renounced his faith, and he had a way of convincing himself that he was right, that I had kind of unconsciously adopted. And I just got so convicted in that study. It's like, wow, why do I think my ideas are right? Why what evidence is there of that? And so when you kind of put those two together, you're becoming aware that God's working in your life, and he has plans for you. And you now have this ability to say, oh, what I'm thinking here isn't the only way of thinking. And I'm not correct by default in how I think about this. Even if other people, have agreed with a lot of things, or gone along with, or you've had some success going on your own ideas and steam, it's like, oh, I was able to, let go of those. I would say let go of those things progressively, and really relinquish those to what God's ideas might be. And so there's been a mixture of, there's the grief and the pain of loss, but also there's the the blessing and the excitement and the fulfillment of having, some knowledge as you progress, again, on that path and in my faith, that there are better things coming, and God has better plans.
I love that, because that's exactly what it is that we're supposed to do. Is we get ourselves to the place where we're convinced that we're right about something. We just know that we're right. We have all the evidence in our world that proves that we're right, which also includes ignoring all the evidence that shows that we're wrong. But we know that we're right. And the power of or moment that you had was you looked at it and said, or maybe I'm not right, or that there's something else out there. And that allowed you to progress. It allowed you to stay a little more curious and find more information and build more facts into your world. And I just love that moment, to be able to understand that you allowed your brain to not be convinced of something that you didn't have all the proof that you did. And so there is more truth than what we want to admit. So I think that's incredible. Where does your walk with God look like at this point? What does abiding look like? Staying, John 15 talks about, you abide in the vine, you stay connected to the vine, and Jesus is that vine, and we're the branch. What does that look like in your world?
Well, I've kind of adopted some of the things that we've all been through, and different practices. But, I have daily abiding time in the morning. I try to start and end my day with that. And then I try to keep up in the middle, and I can kind of see, on busy days, it's really easy to get disconnected from the vine, to stay on that, John 15 metaphor. And it's now pretty easy for me to detect, as I've walked a little longer with the Lord, how when I've strayed, when I have negative thoughts, or when when I get attached, I guess, to an outcome or an objective that maybe that's just my thinking, and I need to disconnect. And times it's toughest for me is when when there's a lot of different pressures or time frames where you have a slog where you have to work for hours in a day, and I can get pretty disconnected and have to and have to pull off and get my solitude time. Is one of the things that has come up in the very recent terms, is that that solitude can be very active, and I just love that concept of seeking. That's where I am today.
So you're going through this process. You've lost the resort. You lost your wife and your father, and now you're in this replanting stage. You're in this brand new life journey development stage, but it's still in a little bit of a waiting stage. What does that waiting stage look like for you as you're waiting on guidance? You're waiting on God's wisdom. You're waiting on God taking you through to that next journey. What does that look like spiritually for you?
Yeah. In the flesh, I have to pray for patience. I would like an answer now.
What did you just say? What did you just say? People always say that you should never pray for patience. Why on God's green earth, Greg Books, would you pray for patience?
It's nice to have your answers now, and people that are more of a type A persuasion, I think, like to have actionable things to do and some progress to be made. So the waiting, can be difficult, but at the same time, I do have trust and faith about those next steps. And if I'm diligent and disciplined about being aware and looking backwards instead of forwards, and kind of being aware of the present, I can see how God's working in my life and what He's building, or the new foundation is what I would say. In the time frame, Jim, you asked, when that about around 50 or so, that I was that time when my mentor kind of introduced me to the Lord. my life has been radically changed, and my foundation is radically changed with today. Now, is there a structure built upon it? No, it's not easy to see what that structure is going to be. Are there times where I in the flesh get frustrated by that? Absolutely. But I can pause and pray and know that something good is coming. But when you think about that, and Brad, to your original question, just about that walk, when they say, it's not the impact of a fall from the sky or a collision that kills you. It's the rapid deceleration. I never had that experience of that rapid deceleration of my life. Like, this was all, it was step by step. And so, because it was walked out in stages, there was nothing that there were painful times, but there was nothing that I couldn't deal with. It was this truly overwhelming and devastating that just, ruined me, per se. It was a total 180-degree reorientation as to what that foundation should be built on. And you hear people say sometimes, what you put between yourself and God, you'll lose. Like, I went from a place to truly not understanding that was even a possibility, in my first 5 decades, and to now understanding that that's actually the way it is. And so it's in a way, there's a balance of excitement there. There's my patience is tested sometimes, but also and I want some answers quicker, but also it's very exciting and gratifying to know that you have a new foundation that is eternal, and that whatever is built next is in God's plan and not yours.
He's still in the waiting room.
Yeah, I feel like kind of maybe dusting off that foundation right now, but yeah, we really haven't built anything on it yet.
Do you have any idea what God's got next for you? I mean, he always uses adversity in our lives to take us from who we were to who we can use more effectively. So you've gone through some serious culling. I mean, serious culling. Riches, relationships.
Yeah.
What do you think's next?
I don't know. It's above my pay grade, Jim.
It is that step by step, right?
That's right. Yeah. I just just trying to listen and be obedient for that next right step.
Yeah, that's really incredible. One of the questions that kind of lingered, and I know when I went through the difficulties that I went through, took
difficulties.
A lot.
Brad says difficulties. Most people would say nuclear implosions.
Well,
and if you want to know more, get a copy of Brad's book, Power of Or, The Unshakable Life. I mean, it's all God, the devil, and the internet. And you can read Brad and his wife Tish's story, because he's difficulties is not what any of us would describe.
There was not a lot of fun, excitement, and excitement, energy in that particular moment of my life. But the interesting thing is that one of the hardest journeys that I had was staying connected to people. It was just really difficult. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't want to be engaged with anybody. I didn't trust anybody. There was just this really interesting journey that I went through in myself. And it was a battle to stay connected with people. Yeah. And there was only a couple that I could stay connected with, because everybody else I didn't trust or didn't want to have anything to do with me because of mysteries that were surrounding their circumstances. But how did you stay connected with people? How did you maintain that? And I think that's something that happens a lot with people when they're struggling in things. It's quick and easy to disengage and become social media junkies or TV watching junkies or just sitting in solitude of anger and bitterness and all the stuff that comes along with that. But how did you stay connected with people?
Good question. Because my story, like yours, and for those listening, I asked Brad for advice, knowing a little bit of his story. And at one point, Brad, I remember you saying, "Well, yours is even worse in some ways." And I was like, "Oh my, I didn't realize that." It was a little bit of a reality check, and that's what I mean about the unpacking for me. So, I lost obviously in that period of of destruction or loss. I lost a lot of folks in a hurry. With there's a lot of scattering and that sort of thing. And what I found is that I had new relationships. So I got a lot stronger with my relationships of people of faith, because you got to remember. So prior to 50, and prior to starting this, I had near zero relationships with people of faith. And now it's 180 degrees. I still have some friends that are not people of faith, but that they're the minority in my life. So that's really the cast of characters has changed dramatically over those several years for me. And so, in terms of connecting, some of those bonds have been have gotten a lot stronger. And there are people that the Lord has kind of taken out of my life, and not and some in ways that were really unfortunate. There was, betrayal, and people that, I don't talk to, or even those that I've forgiven that I still don't talk to. And that's not necessarily of my doing, or my, that I don't have control of. And they're mostly people that I have established new relationships that are on a different foundation today.
And it's going to take you different places. Brad, it's time for rapid fire round 2.
Oh boy.
Yes. Oh boy, is that what you said?
That's what he said.
One thing I want to mention is that I love what you said, was that you've forgiven them, but yet you're still not in a place of reconciliation. And that's something that most people don't really understand, is that they believe that forgiveness means reconciliation, but that's not necessarily always the case. We should always be in a place where we're willing to reconcile.
That's right. That's right.
But we don't have to wait for reconciliation to forgive, and to walk in forgiveness, to release that responsibility that they would have towards you, that just turn that over to the Lord. You can be completely forgiven, but it doesn't mean that reconciliation is going to come. So I love that that description that you gave. Okay, so let's talk about the rapid fire. Just give me what first comes to your mind. What do you think about? Pop out in. Let's just see where this takes us. So, one word that describes your relationship with God today.
Growing.
One thing, one loss taught you that success could never have.
Humility.
Oh, that's good. The hardest truth you had to accept.
Lack of control.
That's really good. A habit that you had to let go.
So many.
First thing.
Driving. Being the driving force. Yeah.
That's good. A habit you had to build.
Waiting.
A prayer that is really good. A prayer you repeat often.
Oh, for discernment.
One thing you're still trusting God with.
Next steps in my life.
What obedience looks like right now.
Just trusting Him.
Okay, and when people look back on your life, now in 20 years, whatever it is, but when people look back on your life, what do you hope that your life will say about God?
Well, I would hope that it would say that, I became a strong follower, and I think that would be just an interesting testament to what God has done and can do, and taking somebody that was kind of raised, feral in the kingdom without any knowledge of the kingdom, and using it to glorify Him in a specific way. And as we know, God uses all these failures or challenges that to build us, and then He will use it in that way. So when people ask me what's next, what I usually do is I don't know. There's so many people in my life, guys, that know me in different facets, and they would never, I could have two people from two different decades that would be like, "You did what? You know him? What? He did that?" They have entirely different opinions of me because, and who I am. And I feel that way in some senses that, wow, God's got a lot of different stuff He could do with this clay. Be interested, and be interesting to see what He does. And so that's in terms of the end of my life, I think that would be a great thing to say, is that He was he was willing to be shaped and be used, and grow to the end.
Greg, Mercy Me has this song called Dear Younger Me. If you could write a letter to your younger self, giving yourself great advice, sharing some wisdom that you now have in your 50s, what is it you would say to your younger you?
Yeah, just awareness of the presence of the Lord. When I was younger, spirituality, when you thought about that intellectually, did not, it couldn't mean anything. It didn't mean, what it does today in terms of, Holy Spirit and walk with the Lord. So just that awareness, because that, really is the true north. And so, how can you have a compass without a true north? So that's the advice I would give the younger me, is like, hey, this is real. Holy Spirit's gonna, is what you want to lead you, and make that your true north, your compass.
Brad, anything final?
I got to tell you, Greg, I so appreciate your heart in this whole thing. You have gone through what most men fear the most, and that is destruction of the world that they build. You have you built a great marriage. You built a tremendous relationship with your father, even though that you separated in your beliefs, and you were building a beautiful resort that people would just enjoy being around, which was your heart and your soul. I mean, it was something that was very exciting to you, and it was all wiped out. But yet your faith stayed strong. And that is something that God, it brings so much glory to the Father, that the faith in Him didn't waver as you went through what most men would be the most afraid of. And that's something that I would encourage to be able to dig into and really understand the heart of God. Having an identity to understand that God, we are His child. And if we know that we're His child, you think about how much He loves and adores and appreciates us. And we have this picture in our head of, if He's really our child, or if we're really His child, why do bad things happen? But just as Jim was saying, He teaches us so much through that journey. And if we understand this basic concept, is that we have this 80 or 90 years in this life, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. But we have this 80 or 90 years in this life in preparation for an eternity. All of a sudden, the perspective changes. And the eternity is all about what it is that we have learned and experienced in this life to grow us into close walk with God. And so, Greg, you are an amazing example of that. And I really appreciate that about you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Greg, thanks for your honesty and courage today. Just being honest, this wasn't a highlight reel conversation, and that's why it matters. That's why it matters. Hey, before we move on, we ask, if you haven't subscribed to the Power of War podcast yet, please do so on your favorite channel, whether it's on a podcast channel or on our YouTube channel or Truth Social or Rumble or wherever it may be. And if this episode resonate with you, share it with a few of your friends who need friends that need encouragement, friends that are dealing with devastation in their lives, people that need encouragement, truth, or permission to slow down and listen to God. And thanks for listening to the Power of Or podcast with Brad Hawkins and Jim Brangenberg. Make sure you check out our sponsors, safernet.com. It'll change how you look at your computing world and the safety of your computing world. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, and True Social. And if you want to join us on the show, pop me an email, jim@iworkforhim.com. That's jim@iwork4him.com. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the most powerful or moment is this. You can lose everything, or you can discover who God really is.
Amen.
This episode of the Power of War podcast is brought to you by SaferNet. For a full VPN experience coupled with antivirus, web filters, internet controls, and an internet use tracking console, SaferNet provides complete protection for your organization. Check them out online at safernet.com.